My name is Soper. I'm the project coordinator at the Manasseh project, Wedgwood Christian Services. Let me give you just a little background about Manasseh and myself. I have a communication arts degree, which is not a real degree, and a master's in popular culture, which oddly is a real degree. So we have that dynamic going for you today. All that to say, I'm not a social worker. I just found myself in the social work field because of this population. Manasseh project does three things, and my hope is that we do them well. First one is public awareness. So we will go into anywhere we're asked to go and educate. So today is an example of that. We speak in churches and Boy Scout groups and high schools and blah, blah, blah. Anything we did a beauty salon one time. It's odd. But 8 women came and we invited us in. So we do a lot of that. And obviously the main frustration with raising awareness is moving people from ignorance to willful apathy. So what we're hoping to do today is I'm not going to rely on a ton of statistics and hyperbole. My goal is to give you practical steps to engage the problem. More often than not, just so we're all on the same page, since we're at a human trafficking awareness type event, statistics are more often than not used in kind of concert with horrific stories to terrify you, make you feel paralyzed, and cut a check. That doesn't solve human trafficking. If money could solve it, it's probably not a problem. So what I'm hoping for today is actually action, progression from this group. So that's my soapbox for public awareness. Second thing we do is professionals education. So law enforcement, social services, medical care professionals, and educators. Anybody most likely to see a child in danger early on in their victimization experience is who we're going to contact. So we do an awful lot of those types of engagements, travel around the state and speak. If you're interested, if you're in one of those 4 fields, we do offer that for free. It's anywhere from 1 to a 3-hour training, and it's geared towards identification and intervention in the life of the child. Law enforcement, social services, medical care professionals, and educators. And I will allow like a broad construct of what those mean, right? So if you're like, well, we do education, but I'm a Sunday school teacher, that's cool, we can do that. So, and the last thing we do is advocacy. The Manasseh project grew out of our experience working in residential care, where we were getting mostly young women, about 80% young women, who have been referred to us with a history of truancy and sexually acting out. What does that mean? They were running away and having sex. The reality was, they were running away, being picked up by a pimp, and being trafficked. But we weren't recognizing that early on. So advocacy for us looks like we go to a lot of juvenile detentions, county jails, sometimes homeless youth shelters, places like that, and work with survivors and with clinicians to help identify to see if the child is a good fit for the shelter that we opened a year ago in 3 days. So we were told when we opened the shelter there isn't a population, and the 15 young women who've lived there in the past year disagree. As do the ones that were referred to us, but for whatever reason weren't the right fit. So that's what we do at Manasseh. So my goal in coming here today is to acknowledge that the #1 entryway into commercial sex in America is right here, being a homeless or runaway youth. So what we're going to do is I'm going to work with you to kind of define some terminology around what we're talking about when it means homeless and runaway, what are the populations within that category, some of the driving factors that lead a student into this situation, how it relates to human trafficking, and then how you engage. Okay? So we'll start off with just a really broad definition. This is how we define runaway. Essentially a child who's under 18, 16 in some states, that leaves a home without permission. We'll boil all that down, avoid the jargon, and that's what it is. So this is not, we're talking about at least 24 hours. So this is not me as a 7-year-old wanting to scare my mom and my sister and packing my red suitcase and walking down the street to the 7-Eleven and buying a Slurpee and walking home. That is not what a runaway is. That's a lie. I lived in the UP, we didn't even have a 7-Eleven. We had holiday stations, right? So that's not what a runaway is. I was not a runaway. This is a child that's leaving home. I also want to acknowledge the term is run away, not run to. We're going to get into why that is an appropriate title for these children. I'm just going to walk you through one set of statistics. Again, not a huge fan of statistics. I'm confident in the ones that I've chosen and that they come from quality research and quality organizations, and I'll identify them as we go. The first one, between 1.6 and 2.8 million children run away every year. That's a swing of 1.2 million children. Let me explain that to you. I am from Kent County. Well, I'm not from Kent County. I'm from Detroit and raised in the UP, so there go your red flags. I live in Kent County, and I could call the juvenile justice system, I could call the family detective agency, I could call the prosecutor's office and say, how many runaways do we have this year in Grand Rapids? And they would tell me the number right away, because they keep it. Other counties, and we won't kind of embarrass them by naming them, Wayne County, don't keep that stat. So when we call doing research to a few different counties, we get the answer, well, we don't keep runaway stats. And it's because there was a lawsuit, it was a whole big thing. And I said, well, what do you do with a parent that's worried about their kid and has run away? And they said, well, they can bring their child down to the Office of Incorrigibility and register that as a runaway, a chronic runaway. Let me just say this about that. Number one, when I was in high school, I was not what you would call a model child. There's no way in hell I'm going to the courthouse with my parents for any reason whatsoever. That's number one. Number two, and I imagine some of these children are in that same vein. Number two, calling it the Office of Incorrigibility says that it's the child's fault that they're running away. That they have no reason except they want to be a hellraiser. So it puts the onus on them rather than on acknowledging that we call it runaway for a reason. So they can collect stats from counties like Kent County, from the National Runaway Switchboard, how many calls they're getting, what the needs are, all the sort of demographic breakdowns of that, from the Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They can get stats from them because they actually do a lot of that sort of tracking. But because we have counties that have either had lawsuits or they're undermanned or underfunded or bankrupt, that don't keep track, that accounts for that swing. Make sense? Okay. So what essentially that means, if those numbers hold out, is that 1 in 5 children between 10 and 17 will run away every year. 1 in 5 kids. Of those kids, it's about a 50-50 split of boys and girls. I call them boys and girls because that's what they are. If you are under 18, you are a child. Just like I call, my wife and I have 4 kids, they are boys and girls. I'm not calling them young adults. They're boys and girls, they're children. And we'll get into how greatly they are children when we talk about the brain development in a little while. Anyway, 50% boys and girls. Let me draw attention to that stat just a little bit. A young man or a boy will run away from home once, maybe twice. Then they're going to make a call. Either I'm going to stay and I'm going to take it, whatever sort of abuse or unhealthy home situation I've got, or I'm just going to go and I'm never coming back. Young women, on the other hand, have a different cycle. They will run away from home and return to it 6 to 8 times. Where else do we see that 6 to 8 time cycle of a woman returning to violence?
Domestic violence.
Domestic violence. You know where else we see it? Children who are trafficked returning to their parent or to the life. 6 to 8 times. Now, I love to study, I love to read, but no time for research at this point, or a research project. But if some of you are students or researchy types, I would love to see a quality study done on what is it about our culture that has created this cycle for women returning to violence and abuse. What are the cultural norms? What are the system barriers? All that sort of stuff. I'm fascinated by that. I grew up with a mom that worked in a domestic violence shelter, and even as a kid, 5, 6, 7 years old, when we would go sleep in the back of the DV shelter by my mom, I remember seeing the same family, like moms and kids coming in over and over and over, and it always confused me. If you're coming in here bloody all the time, why do you look bad? It doesn't make any sense. But there are reasons why. Any questions about that so far? I tend to talk really quickly, and it's a little bit like trying to take a drink out of a fire hose. So if I am overwhelming you and your brain is becoming the 9th ward and it's about to break the levee, raise your hand, ask a question, and I won't slow down, but I'll at least answer your question.
Is that Bansky?
What was that?
Is that Bansky?
Banksy, yes.
From where?
It was in Louisiana.
Oh.
Oddly enough. Okay. I want to also draw attention to the fact that there are 3 different populations that pour into the homeless youth kind of umbrella. You've got runaways, and that's about half. The other about half are throwaway kids. Anybody tell me the difference between a runaway and a throwaway?
Throwaways are kicked out.
Okay, so a runaway will leave home and somebody will actually call and report them or care or just want to dodge a CPS report by saying I'm a good parent and make a phone call. I don't say that like with any, okay, it's happened a lot, just put it that way. Where someone's been a bad parent and the kid runs away and they don't want to catch a CPS charge for neglect, so they make the phone call, but the kid is actually a throwaway. Or the kid is told to leave, or they leave and nobody cares. So depending on kind of what background you come from, you may interact with more of those children. And you've got a third category, which is a smaller part of the population, but it's still significant and is more likely to be chronically or cyclically homeless for their entire life, and that's kids aging out of foster care at 18. We have some systems in place that keep kids safe and in the system and funded until they're 21. But as we'll get into when we start talking about brain development, it doesn't matter how old the child is, it depends on how well their brain is developed. And can they take advantage of free tuition and housing and that sort of thing. We'll get into that. 1 in 3 children, how many people have heard the statistic that 1 in 3 children, runaways, will be sexually exploited within 48 hours of leaving home? How many people have heard that stat? Can I tell you that it's wrong? 1 in 3 children will be approached by someone who would exploit them if given the opportunity. I hate the amount of hyperbole that is evident in the human trafficking field. We need to quantify and qualify everything. 1 in 3 will be approached by someone who would exploit them if given the opportunity. So let me give you an example of how that's played out in kind of our work. We had a girl come and stay with us in residential, not in the shelter, but in a different program. At 15, she was a stripper. Crassly, that was how she made money for her and her boyfriend. Had a horrible relationship with her mother, so when she was discharged from us and went home to mom, it was just a powder keg, it was just waiting to blow. So a gentleman that had worked with her in the past bumped into her on the street, and she was no longer living with her mom at 16. In the last session, I actually said what she said, but now I'm being videotaped, so let me kind of calm it down. He said, so what are you doing these days? And she said, well, I'm just selling my body because that's all I got. He was kind of blown away by that. At 16, she had already accepted that this was her lot in life. She had run away from her mom's, was living with an older boyfriend who was gang affiliated, who paid her the quote-unquote compliment that you're so hot, men would pay to see you dance. Let me say this one time, that is not a compliment. And I have 3 daughters and a son, and my 3 daughters are free to lay out any guy that would say that to them, and then like a good Christian, like, explain that. That is not a compliment why they're helping him back up. Like that is not appropriate. But she heard it as a compliment. Because she had already come to understand that her value was sex and sexuality. So she had simply figured out how to monetize her value and her skill set. That was her at 16. She was a runaway with high vulnerability factors that was approached by someone. I could name 5 to 10 others in the same boat that have never been sexually exploited, right? So they'll be approached, but it doesn't mean they'll take the bait every time. 17% of kids that are runaways report that there was some sort of sexual abuse in the home. That's not counting teachers at school. I'm not saying teachers are molesting children, but you get my drift. Teachers or aunts or uncles or neighborhood kids or whatever. This is just in the home. 47% report physical abuse and 38% report emotional abuse. Again, it is an accurate term, run away. When a child runs away, they kind of take off with what they can fit in their backpack, which isn't much. So there are these are just kind of to give you a broad construct of what this population kind of looks like. But it's important that we talk about the driving factors, why a child ends up homeless. The first one is physical or sexual abuse. And we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that one because I think it's specifically important as we talk about this in relationship to human trafficking. As you're at a human trafficking conference, I suspect you want to hear a little bit about that as well. So, when we talk about sexual abuse, I want you to understand that this is a continuum. You've got sexual abuse on one side and you've got commercial sexual exploitation on the other. And this is not to lessen the impact of child sexual abuse, but child sexual abuse is not human trafficking. One of the quotes that I hold deeply, it was by a woman in Connecticut that was a survivor, and she said, most rape victims get raped one time. We get raped over and over and over. Okay, so there is a difference in experience. So let's start with this one, with child sexual abuse. I think we all have a concept of what it is. We would call it molestation, right? And an adult perpetrating this on a child would catch a criminal sexual conduct charge of varying in degree 1 to 4. Just kind of it's not a fun fact, it's an FYI. Simply because someone gets a CSC 3 does not mean that it's a lesser degree than CSC 1, it's just a different type. It's not a graded scale necessarily. 1 and 3 involve penetration, 2 and 4 don't. This leaves lasting scars. If this is not addressed, it will affect employment, it will affect relationships, it will affect their future sexual endeavor, any of that. This sets a child up to be really badly damaged. Now, in the United States, this is not human trafficking. The UN actually has an interesting little thing going on where this would be considered, but we're not in the UN, so it doesn't matter. Sexual exploitation of children is the second step. This is where we see a lot of our homeless youth starting, okay? And I'll give you an example of why. That first sentence is very much similar to child sexual abuse. The second sentence is what I want you to pay attention to, and it can start to involve the remuneration of money, goods, or services of the promises thereof. Anybody ever heard of couch surfing? Okay, this is not when you put a couch in the back of a truck. Just to make that distinction, I've had somebody go, yeah, that's when you put, no, it's not, sir, it's not. How does that even have a bearing? What couch surfing is there's two types, and I want to make a distinction between the two. There's the kind of like hippie, we'll go online, and then like you can smoke pot and sleep on my couch. That's not what I'm talking about. It's not having a place to stay, so for a child, so going from house to house to house as the opportunity presents itself. So the story we hear over and over and over with the human trafficking population at minor female victims that are domestic is, well, I got in a fight with my mom, or I got in a fight with my dad, so I left the house and I went to my friend's house and I was allowed to stay there for a few days, but then their mom got mad that I was there, so I left and I went to this other guy's house, and blah, blah, blah. And this story goes on for like 2 minutes of all these places that she's staying. And then she said, then we went to this party and it was late and I didn't have anywhere to go, and the guy said, oh, you can stay at my house so long as you give me a blowjob. And it's like, stops right there. They don't want to talk anymore, it just happened. That is not a choice. That is a lack of choice. Because it could be that much more dangerous outside, is kind of the play off in their head. Yeah, I might have to do this sexually that I don't want to do, but at least I'm not getting raped or beaten up outside. Like this guy has some modicum of like modesty or whatever, right? This is the first step. This is not human trafficking by our legislation. Again, there could be a CSC charge brought into play, but my guess is, and this is not just some random guess, it's educated, I heard the story, the girl would never, or boy, would never report what was happening because there's so much guilt and shame involved. And it's similar to child sexual abuse. So much doesn't come out until somebody's 21, 22, or later in life that something happened to them. So this is the second step, and here's the third. Commercial sexual exploitation of children. How many people are familiar with the term CSEC? Commercial sexual exploitation of children, CSEC, is becoming the industry standard for the way we talk about minors in traffic. Okay? So get ahead of the curve and just start getting used to the term CSEC. There are two kind of competing terms, domestic minor sex trafficking victim and CSEC. This one's going to win out, so just embrace it. This is human trafficking and can be defined as such. So the first sentence, again, very similar to sexual exploitation of children. The second one is what we really want to focus on, defined by an element of organization and or the context and or the intent of the commercial sex industry. This is prostitution. And a victim is being prostituted. They are not a prostitute. The person in either Michigan or by federal statute, if they're a pimp or a buyer, can be charged. Okay? The issue with this, and we're going to get into this as we kind of move on the continuum, what is the age of sexual consent in Michigan?
16.
16 years old. Boys and girls can be charged with prostitution in Michigan at 16 and 17 years old. By federal statute, it's 18. Michigan says it's 16. Not only do I think that's awkward and terrible, I also don't believe police want to charge a child with prostitution. But oftentimes the child in this situation will respond in anger. They're afraid, right? In the 1 year we've been in existence, we have 5, count them, 5 charges in our house of assaulting a police officer. That's a third of our kids punched out a cop. I'm not proud of that, I'm just saying. Tough girls. So when that happens, even if they're in a situation where the officer sometimes knows that they're prostituting or being prostituted, they will be charged with something else. Because it is gut-wrenching to charge a child with prostitution. The Safe Harbor Act is being introduced into Michigan, has been a few weeks back. Let me just say a quick caveat, 19 bills regarding human trafficking were introduced in our state legislature just this, past 2 weeks ago. Before you say yay, read the bill. I'm not for it or against it yet. I have yet to read all 19, but know what you're saying good happiness about, okay? They might be wonderful, and I really, really hope they are. But be knowledgeable. Just because it's a bill about human trafficking and victimization does not mean it's a wonderful bill, so we need to make sure that the right ones go forward. So, any questions about this being human trafficking? So we have this continuum. And it is a funnel effect, okay? So 1 in 3 young women and 1 in 6 young men will be sexually assaulted before they're 18 years old. Anybody read the recent kind of media blitz around Chris Brown saying he lost his virginity when he was 8? No, Chris Brown was raped at 8 by a 15-year-old girl. It was played off as he's got so much game, he was exuding sexuality at 8. This major star with huge anger issues was raped as a child. Just to think that. So you've got a very huge population here. As you travel that way on the continuum, it goes down. Again, this population is this big in comparison to some of the bigger issues in our culture. Child sexual abuse, poverty for sure, substance use. There are bigger populations than the commercially sexually exploited population. But for them, it's a wrap. The average lifespan of a person in prostitution is 7 years. They're not going to last. They're a kind of throwaway commodity after they're done. So in this early stage here, so right through here, what sexual abuse does to a child is it confuses love, sex, and acceptance, right? So where they learn that their value is sexual, their value is pleasing somebody else sexually. They're also parentified, right? They're pulled into an adult role. I'm doing one adult act, why can't I do other adult acts? So my uncle sexually abuses me, and then he goes out and he drinks in the living room. Why can't I do that? So he's done with sex and he gets to do what he wants to do. I should be able to do that too. Why do I have to go to school? Why is it weird for me to raise my other siblings? Why can't I smoke? Why can't I drink? Why can't I drive a car? All those roles get confused, especially if it's repeated in a really unhealthy environment, right? And then you've got guilt and shame, and you've got self-esteem issues just galore. But what is key, and I want you to take this away, is that this is a brain development issue. My hope is that my brain looks like that, okay? And your brain does too. Whereas the red represents activity, whereas most of the activity in a healthy brain on the left. In the front. What is in our frontal lobe? What's it responsible for? Judgment, executive functioning, discernment, rationality. So, what also you've got is pay attention to these light green and yellow areas. These are all neural pathways, neurons and all that sort of stuff. They're firing. Which means, if this is my brain, it has both a gas pedal and brakes. So if somebody says something mean about my mom in this room, and I get super ticked, I can rationally think through, I could deck that person, but I don't really want to catch a charge, so I'm just going to let it go. Right? I can control my emotions. Because I have the ability to go from back here to up there. Now, on this side, where's most of the activity? What is the back of the brain responsible for? What was that?
Vision.
Vision? What else?
Survival.
So it's connected to sensitive. What was theirs?
Emergency survival response.
Fight, flight, and freeze. It's all back here. Our brains develop from the back to the front. If you want to know what the back of the brain is responsible for, take something away from your 3-year-old and watch what happens. Right? They hit the floor and they're screaming and it's blood and snot and hair in the air, right? That is what is responsible for in the back. This brain is a healthy brain, meaning that it is developed well. They're same-aged brains, so we're clear. These people are the same age. This one over here was sexually abused repeatedly and often, or repeatedly and horribly. Note, all the activity is in the back. We have almost no neural pathways going to the front. And it is operating in a near fight, like constant fight, flight, and freeze. So it is essentially, if I was to strap a fire alarm to the back of your head and flipped it on and you walked around all day, everything is scary. I respond to everything in fear. Everything's a threat. That is the life of one of these young women, or young men, victims of CSEC. Yes, ma'am.
Can the brain keep developing and become a healthier looking brain after they get treatment and maybe years of,
Yeah.
being away
Let
from
me give you an example, and that's a great question. Let me answer it in this way. 2 years ago, I had back surgery. And not to be crass, but it looked like the doctor was just extending my butt crack all the way up my back. Like I'm stapled and screwed together, all right? And I came home, and my daughter looked at my back and thought they had installed a zipper because I had staples, and she was mortified. It was like I had to use a walker. It was traumatic to my back. About a year and a half later, my daughter came upstairs to wake me up. She threw back the covers, said, "Dad, let's get going." And she looked at my back, and the scar had shrunk up, about that big. And she said, "Oh, Dad, your scar's not as scary anymore." Same thing. I don't have pain in my legs anymore, but there are limitations to what I can do, right? So I want you to think about it this way. If this brain represents a brain of a person that has the volume on their headphones turned up to 10 all the time, and this brain is the brain of a person that has headphones on and that volume is at 1. The one that's at 10 will never become a 1, but it can become a 2, 3, 4. Now, here's my challenge to you. Go out and get a really good pair of headphones, put them on, turn it up to 10, and try to live one day like that. You can't write reports, you can't talk to people, you can't function and focus. The next day, turn it down to a 4, and watch how much you can get done, right? It might never be that moment of silence, but it can be rest. Right? It may never be complete and total shalom, right? But we're moving that direction, is what I'm trying to say. That's something that is worthwhile. Go ahead.
Well, that picture on the right, you said, are you sure, is that the sole cause of that kind of brain development? Or are there other traumas that cause that?
There was no physical trauma that was a reason.
Drug use or
Nope.
Violence or trauma?
And one of the great benefits we have in the state, the Southwest Michigan Children's Trauma Assessment Center, operated by a guy named Jim Henry. He works with children who've been sexually traumatized over and over and over, and he does brain scans on a ton of them, right? So he has a large sample, and this is repeated.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating stuff if it weren't so horrible,
Yeah.
right? So if nothing else, take away from this, we tend to assume that women and young men in this world want to be there. Or if they don't want to be there, why don't they just leave, right? Or why don't they do better? I've worked with really, really traumatized children since I graduated college, right? 10 years. And that's what I did. And we have this thought of, don't they want to do well? Of course, all children want to do well. Just a reality. Children want to be loved, want to do well, want to be appreciated, want to reach these high, lofty goals. It is not that they don't want to, it is that they cannot. They lack the brain capacity for that. So we focus on skill building, repetition, to build those neural pathways into their head. That is incredibly important. When we're talking about schooling and building confidence, the more confident, we start them with the super easy stuff in school. Then they like blow through it and get all these credits back. And then they feel great. So when they get to chemistry or trig, they're like, oh, I can do this. We don't start them in trigonometry, it's overwhelming, and they go into fight, flight, and freeze, and it's over. But you want me to run in a circle and kick a ball? I can do that. Right? I can take a sewing class. I can start with really simple consumer math where I'm just adding figures, that's okay. So we build them up in that way so they get used to that rhythm and repetition, they build the skills up and they're able to do it. Now that's not, we're talking about victims of CSEC here. This is the reality for homeless youth as well. So many of them have been so horribly abused that they're on the street where they're expected to survive. Their on-the-job training is their childhood sexual abuse. When I finished college, my parents were like, oh, we're so proud of you, this is great. We don't know why you got the degree you did, but we're happy for you. So now that you've got a degree, go get a real job. So meaning, my dad's a contractor, go learn a trade. Why? Because when you cannot talk yourself out of the situation you've gotten yourself in, you're going to get fired and you're going to need a job. So again, if I said something really fundamentally screwed up in this room today and got back to my supervisor and I was fired on Monday, I'd be laying brick by Tuesday because I have a skill set to fall back on. And a network. For these young women, when they get in that situation where, like Leslie was talking about earlier, where they don't have a network and they don't have a job, and they don't have even an ID to go get a job, and they don't have a utility bill to get the ID to go get the job, you fall back to what you know. Their skill set is sexual, and their value is sexual. Make sense? Okay. Poverty. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just wondering, kind of, like her question.
Mm-hmm.
We adopted my son when he was like 18 months old
Sure.
from out of the country. And he's had some real challenges, and his frontal lobe is very underdeveloped,
Mhm.
so reasoning, and he's just a real black and white thinker.
Sure.
He does struggle in school some, but he's definitely that typical
Yeah.
brain on the right. And you were saying, you know, some of the things that you did at your place, but I mean, he's not a runaway, he's never gotten
Sure.
in any trouble. How can I help him?
Do you work with an occupational therapist yet?
No.
Get one. There's a lot of sensory things that helps that brain development.
Mm-hmm.
An OT can do a lot of work in a little amount of time.
Okay.
I would, I'm not making guarantees, whatever. I've seen it do amazing things.
Okay.
And I've worked with everything from juvenile sex offenders to pretty severely developmentally delayed kids, some autistic kids. OTs do incredible work.
There's a place, I live near Kalamazoo, and there's a place called like the Brain Center or something like that.
Mhm.
It's some new kind of, have you heard
Brains is a
anything
good
about
spot,
that?
yeah. We have, our girls get brains assessment consistently. They'll give you great insight into executive functioning, what to do with them before they have a big task. And this, it relates to what we're talking about. Some of our young women, we go for a walk or a run
Mhm.
before we give them a task to do, like clean your room.
Right.
Because getting some of their even throwing a ball back and forth between their hands connects the two sides of their brain.
Mm-hmm.
So their emotions and their language and sensory is all connecting, and we can actually have a conversation about their trauma. A good OT is able to give you that insight.
Okay. Is that the same thing as like, I've been hearing about train your brain, retrain your brain, like all the time now? Is it basically the same concept?
I have no idea, but if it's involving weight loss, let me know and I'd be.
Yeah, I know, it's not. I wish it was too.
Yeah, but a good OT,
Okay,
do some research and
thank
you'll find a
you.
good one down in Kalamazoo.
Okay.
In fact, I would contact the Southwest Michigan Children's Trauma Assessment Center and just kind of let them know your situation, they might be able to refer you.
Okay, thanks.
Poverty, let's split it into two categories. Financial on one side and relational on the other. Let me say this, 70% of the trafficked domestic minor population in America is female, well, 80% female, but minority and from poverty. It is not just financial poverty that consistently leads kids into traffic, but it is a huge driver. So if we were to watch 20/20 or 60 Minutes, the face of human trafficking victims is a white girl from the burbs, middle, upper class, right? The movie Taken had this rich girl who at 16 is allowed to go to Paris with her friend. Okay, Liam Neeson can kill everybody, but he's horrible parenting skills. It's the wrong face. So as it relates to poverty, kids who have nothing and are offered something and already have kind of this brain development issue going on, you take the better deal. I'd take the better deal, for goodness sakes. If I get out of here and I jump in my VW Golf out there and somebody pulls up with a Bentley and is like, hey, tradesies, dope, yes, that'd be great. So you've got that going on. But the other side, that relational poverty is just as important, right? Where a child doesn't have somebody pouring into their life on a consistent basis, letting them know that while their body and their sexuality have great value, it is not their only value. So let me give you an example of how this works out in the human trafficking arena. There's a pimp in Nashville that got caught and was explaining how he goes about getting girls. And he said, the first thing I would do is I would just take a couple loops around the mall, and I would look for the girl that was standing and just kind of window shopping, right? Not really great dressed, alone, just kind of staring into the window. And he said, I would walk up to her and hand her a business card and say, hey, I'm a modeling agent. You have what it takes. But you can't start your career dressed like that, so we're going to front you the money. We're going to get you in there, get you new shoes, new clothes. We're going to take you, get your hair and nails done, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, the look, some of the girls would be like, oh, thanks, and wander away, but some would be like, really? And he said the look on their face was not just that they were going to be America's Next Top Model. It was that their problems were over. I'm going to buy my mom a house. I'm going to buy my mom a car. We're never going to have to worry about paying the electricity bill. The cable will always be on. And he said, if I can get them to go in the store and let me buy them this stuff, I can get them to go every time. Then he would also just kind of go and lean against the wall. Anybody leaning against the wall in a mall is a creeper, and we should just all agree on that, right? You don't need like, polo shirt and gray slacks to be that. Why are the guys in the mall off topic? They're always like the mustache and the gray slacks and the polo, like eyeballing my kids in the kiddie play area. Not that guy. Right, this dude looks good, and he's leaning up against the wall in a mall, and as girls walk by, he would just say, ooh, you look good in those jeans. Again, not a compliment by someone who is not your friend or intimate partner, okay? So most girls would walk right up behind you and be like, ugh, I feel dirty, right? Because they're right there, he is objectifying their body, and they recognize it. And most people, and most women in that situation can recognize that guy is a creeper. The next one would walk by, and he would do it again, and they'd be like, thanks, and keep walking. But because everything is about power and control for a pimp, they are not chasing that girl. The next one walks by, says it, she turns around, really? Comes back to talk. Boom, got her. This girl is open to a stranger complimenting and objectifying her body in so much as she will turn around and go back for more. That's the girl he'd get. Now remember, he only needs one a day, if not one a week, to make a lot of money. So poverty is not just one, it is a broad spectrum. So when people come and want to volunteer for the Manasseh project, very often I think they have this concept that they're going to like kick in a door and like be a victor rolling into Baghdad and rescue a girl. I don't do that. It's the back, it's not like but what we say is that's awesome. Does your church or whatever organization have a mentoring program? No? Well, you should start one, because that's an anti-trafficking endeavor. To get involved in the life of a high-risk child so you can recognize signs of success and distress and respond accordingly, that's anti-trafficking, because that's prevention. And 95% of this work is prevention work. Stop kids, because even if they don't end up being commercially sexually exploited, so many kids that have a really warped view of healthy relationships will end up being relationally exploited. And that's horrible in and of itself. Next, the LGBT population. I have to start talking quickly, as if I hadn't already. So if I was to go to any middle or high school and do a survey on sexuality, and just ask children, are you straight, or do you identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or questioning, right? We'll throw a Q on the end of LGBT. I'm going to get maybe 5, maybe 10% of kids would say, I'm LGBT or questioning, right? If I go to the homeless youth population, I'm going to get between 20 and 40% identify as LGBTQ. That's a statistic that gives me pause. Not because I doubt it, because I work with these kids, but because I have questions about why it's so disproportionate and why being LGBT becomes a risk factor for being homeless. Let me tell you just kind of anecdotally the story that I get over and over and over from young men. My dad or my mom said I can't be gay and be in their house, so I guess I won't be in their house. And then they're not. And then going back to poverty, not only are they broke, but they're looking for someone to accept them. If pimping is anything, it is highly relational. A pimp is a master manipulator. That's what they do. They know people. If they're worth their salt as a pimp, they could turn me inside out. Right? That's what they do. So they will be accepted by someone who will exploit them. Over and over again. Now here's the deal. I'm not here today to somehow dictate your morality or tell you what you're supposed to believe. Here's what I will say. In the same way that I would tell you, it is not okay to turn a child away for their race, their gender, if they're male or female. It is also not okay to somehow just qualify just this section as, well, they shouldn't be gay and this wouldn't happen. Those children deserve justice, respect, and compassion, the same as any other kid does. So there is no qualifier when it's a child being injured. I hear repeatedly sometimes, oh, they're just perverts and they're waiting out like in a roadside park. I know a couple of those kids. They're not out there because they want to be. Again, this is not a choice, it is a lack of choice. They're not out there because they want to be out there. They're trying to survive, and that is tough sledding. And then, the worst part about this for me is, you know, the home is supposed to be the safest spot. When they get kicked out of there, what's the next safest place to go for a child? For my kids, it's school. They have adults that love them there, and love them well. But for these kids, they've been picked on so badly for their sexuality at school that school is not a safe place either. So this plays into the fact that 75% of runaway and homeless kids drop out of school. Largely because they're LGBT and it's not a safe place. So when we speak in middle and high schools and we talk about this subject, you want to end youth homelessness. Stop bullying someone for how they display their sexuality or their gender. Look, I know how I look, right? I grew up pretty blue collar, and jeans, black t-shirts, and tattoos are pretty commonplace in my family. In fact, I might be the least tattooed guy in my family, right? But one of my best friends is the prettiest man I've ever met in my life. He is so into fashion. I am not more of a man because I look like this and he looks like that. I am not worthy of acceptance. Even if he was gay, I'm more worthy of acceptance than he is. I don't even know where that would fall in someone's healthy spirituality, to be honest. I mean, that's too much for me, but this population is disproportionately represented in the homeless youth population. Mental health issues. Just like you're going to have in the adult homeless community, you're going to have mental health issues with this population as well. Not only do some mental health issues set you apart maybe intellectually, but they do socially as well, right? How many of us don't remember, right, somebody that didn't quite fit in because maybe, you know, whether it was mental health or it was development or whatever, when we push people to the outside of acceptable for us, it's more likely that they engage in more and more risky behavior to be accepted, right? So this plays into that as well. And the last one is substance abuse, and I'll say this. Substance abuse plays into that kids want to do well category. Yeah, they want to experiment and figure out, you know, what's it like to paint or glue or whatever. Maybe I just gave away more blue-collar background. But more often than not, it's a coping tool, specifically with the homeless youth population. You don't want to face the reality that not only are you rejected by your family, you have no place to be, or as Leslie put it earlier today, if that was happening to me, I would want to be as high as a kite all the time. It's a coping tool. And kids are preyed on using this to control them. I also want to kind of qualify the other end of that. As it relates to human trafficking, some pimps don't want their girls or boys on drugs. They'll last longer. Their bodies don't break down as quick. And there's a few examples that we've worked with where you know, we have a couple girls in the house that had some pretty severe substance use issues that had been on the street. Other girls that had not had been denied any sort of coping tool. Like, and I say coping tool, I recognize it's unhealthy. They've been denied that. It would be like having an operation while you're still awake. That level of intensity, right? So let's talk real briefly about different arenas for sexual exploitation. I'm not going to spend time on all of them in that, as it relates to the homeless youth population, not a lot of homeless youth are going to end up in a residential brothel. Residential brothels in America are largely operated by, or commonly I should say, operated by Hispanic gangs like MS-13, that sort of thing. So it's not likely that you're going to get a domestic-born child to end up in a residential brothel. May happen here or there. Stripping is rather common, and by the way, that's not just common with some poor kid that got suckered into it by a gang. One of the interesting realities of my job is that we have opportunities to work with a lot of different demographics. And so anybody know what ADA is in West Michigan? ADA is where Amway is, and where a lot of the Amway executives live. And we've had girls stripping in barns that are in high school, stripping for their male counterparts for high-end purses. Like, these are supposed to be very well-adjusted children, right? Their parents are executives, blah, blah, blah. And it happens in Ada, it happens in Rockford, it happens in Forest Hills. And these are areas around Grand Rapids that are wealthy, right? Where this shouldn't happen. Obviously, phone sex operator isn't going to fall into this category so much. Escort services is a little bit different in that there's probably 5 or 6 different escort services in Grand Rapids that I could pay for sex with a credit card. I can go online and order somebody. But it's more likely that you're going to have a site like Backpage. People familiar with Backpage? It gets a lot of press. Backpage does, and it is a very large peddler of flesh across America, but there's probably, I can think of 5 or 6 others. U.S.A.com, naughtyreviews.com, Craigslist, My Companion. I mean, there's a bunch. And for every one that's advertising a girl, or probably for every 3 that are advertising for sex, you've got a site that's a review site, where buyers are reporting, like a review on Amazon, how much they paid, what they did to the person, would they repeat, what does their body look like, were there children in the next room, was the environment, did it smell like smoke, like they were reviewing a hotel. And so you've got this flesh being sold, and you've got people saying, oh, this is what the flesh is like, and that's fine. Warning each other for where law enforcement is, right? Escort services and escort sites are a big one. When I say prostitution, I make a distinction between survival sex and prostitution. If nothing else but to protect kind of that victimization mentality of this child is not a prostitute, they are a victim. A child cannot choose this. Do you know why we have that age of 18? Because the brains are not developed yet. Even a healthy brain is not hardwired yet. Women reach that age around 19, 20 years old. Guys, women, it's like 22, 23, 24. I married an older woman, so what up, right? I beat that rap. So we recognize that the brain isn't developed even in a healthy situation. Prostitution is more of a reference to street level activity, not couch surfing and being accosted and sexually assaulted. So make the difference there. The last one is pornography, and I'm not gonna get a ton into that, but let me quickly explain to you how I could make money off off pornography really easily. I could pay for, go online, post an ad and say, hey, I'm looking for X, Y, or Z, a boy or a girl this big. Somebody responds to it, they come to my house or my out call or in call or whatever I've got going on as a John. I can videotape myself doing whatever I wanted to that child, post it online, and turn a really big profit. So maybe I'd pay $200 for a 13-year-old boy or girl who's a runaway, but I'm gonna make $6 grand easy. It is a highly profitable business, and the majority of child porn is created in the United States, 55%. And it's really easy why, I can explain it. Got one? Mine has a camera on it. And I saw an ad for one the other day that had like a 2 billion megapixel one where people were punching each other. Anybody else see that? All right, this is why. It's super easy. This is also why I love prosecutors. In West Michigan, 2 years ago, we had 30 federal cases for child pornography, production and distribution. Not just some perv has it on his computer, but production and distribution, federal. You know how it went federal? Because it was a state level case. An FBI agent said, where did they get their phone? I don't know. Where was it made? They looked at the phone. China. Oh, it's federal now. It wasn't made in the state. Now it's a federal crime. Man, I dig people like that. If they find a child, a homeless youth that's being advertised on Backpage in Michigan, Backpage is run by Village Voice out of New York City. Their servers are in Arizona. It's crossing state lines. It's a federal crime. This is why it's exciting to see law enforcement get on board. This is why it's exciting to see legislation move forward that protects victims and puts them first before the prosecution. I want the bad guy to go away as well. We have to protect the victim first. So you're looking at escort services, survival sex and or prostitution, street level prostitution, and pornography as arenas where homeless people get taken advantage of. We do my last one as it relates to the that 1 in 3 number. So I live in Grand Rapids, and police and I have a fairly good relationship, and so when I call them and ask them for this number, they give it to me. Last year, we had 818 runaways, which is about 1,600 when you take into account that that's only 50% of the population, right? Of the minor population. I'm not even counting kids that age out of foster care right now. About 1,600 kids. So my possible victims in that 1 out of 3 are about 533. Now as an exercise in knocking down the stats, let me say that recidivism is common in runaways. So let's say that this is a duplicated number, meaning a parent called on a child repeatedly, and this number is more accurate at 600. So you had so many kids running away so many times that you added an extra 218. So that would knock it down to 1,200, so now we got 400 kids that are possible victims. That number makes sense to me, only because of my experience, perhaps. As a measure of practicality, as a tool to take home, call your local juvenile justice office, prosecutor, or family detectives, which I'm sure you have in your county, and ask them for your runaway population. Do the math yourself. Because often we fall into this kind of trap where stats get us in trouble and we say, well, the U.S. State Department says that there's 1.8 victims of human trafficking for every 1,000 people in population. So for me in West Michigan, Grand Rapids, Muskegon, and Holland, I've got 2,400 victims. I can give you that answer. That could be high, that could be low. It's a guess. This doesn't turn the page until we take it seriously and do the right research, and this is the best place to start, is with the homeless youth population. Start doing your own research. Understand the problem, and then you figure out where you fit in. You fit in as a mentor. You fit in as someone who teaches, whether it's accounting or money management or cooking, to this population. When you ask that question, they're going to ask why. Say you're interested in getting involved and you're just wondering how big the problem is. Ask them who works with this population. These are so many just easy ways. To end human trafficking, you just be a good citizen. Don't buy sex, support the vulnerable, and hold each other accountable. So I'm not trying to oversimplify, but that's kind of the reality. Last slide. I know I said that last time. which makes me a liar, so don't believe anything I said this whole time. The list on the right is a little bit more of a woman who's been in the life for a while. My wife used to work with women who are living the life, and so you have things like multiple abortions, fertility issues, broken teeth, huge histories of substance use, loss of children to the system. I mean, it's very compounded trauma, right? This side is more what you're going to see with kids, and I want to kind of draw this out as it relates to runaway and homeless youth. Now, any one of them does not mean, just like one, does not mean that a child is being trafficked. I grew up, there was 4 of us in my crew, and 3 out of the 4, me being the one who could grow a beard. I was a smoothie in high school. But the other 3 could buy beer for us when we were 15. We lied about our age. A couple of us had fake IDs. I mean, some of them were so hairy they could grow a hairnet, like they could grow hair here and a beard. We called it a hairnet, like a helmet. So just one does not mean that a child is being trafficked. A good friend of mine works for CPS, and he consistently uses the term confluence of evidence. When you've got 5, 6, or 7 of these red flags going off, then you've got an issue. So the top 4 are given. Any number of kids will do that stuff. Dating an older controlling man or woman, or just kind of having that controlling person around, is a red flag for me, and should be for you. It is not good for a 15-year-old girl to be dating a 28, 29, 30-year-old guy. It doesn't work. If bare minimum, there is something unhealthy relationally there. Add into that, not just STDs or need for pregnancy tests, but kind of signs of the commercial sex industry. If you're working with a child that you have questions about, do they have a safe place to be, and they've got condoms, lubricant, and baby wipes on them, you've got a problem. And I'm not talking 1 or 2 condoms. I'm talking 15 to 20 condoms, right? Number 1, nobody has that kind of game in high school. Number 2, it's a sign that they're having a lot of sex, and the baby wipes are a sign that they're cleaning up afterwards, getting ready for the next customer. I'm not trying to be graphic, this is just a reality. When we recover young women, the police call us and say, can you come down, and we help the police kind of sort through their stuff. There are always those 3 things: condoms, lubricant, baby wipes, all the time. And a cell phone that they can get rid of quickly. So let me kind of throw in the last little bit here when it comes to money and jewelry, or even new clothing. So a child has nothing and has run away from home and has become homeless. And you see that kind of degrading value of their work ethic, of their relationships, of the state of their clothes. And then this child shows up with new jeans, new shoes, hair done, nails done. And this lasts for a couple of months. Now their mom could have hit the Powerball, awesome. But chances are something else is going on. But it makes it increasingly difficult to go to the principal of that school and say, I have some concerns about that child. All of a sudden she's got all this stuff. You mean the one that's all put together over there? The one that looks happy, healthy, and is still in school? Of course she's in school, she's recruiting. That's a big issue. And there is no silver bullet. It's not like you can go talk to her, get the principal, get the cops involved, and she's just going to be like, oh, thank you. It doesn't work that way. This is a long hustle if you want to engage trafficking or homeless youth. You've got to build a relationship. You've got to provide a space where they can build their skills. Give you an example really quickly of that money, kid looking good, and connections to him. So there's a high school in Grand Rapids where a 14-year-old girl was getting prostituted in 3 different drug houses. She looked great. She was there giving her purses and money, and her hair was done all the time. She went to the school nurse and said, I need an STD test. And the nurse said, why? And she said, it's a hazard of the job. And the nurse's eyes were like, what? Come to find out, she was being prostituted by this guy, and she was not going to give him up. And she said, well, I'm not the only one who does it. And they said, well, who else? Well, I'm not going to talk about it. She kept motioning with her hands. She had this boy's name written on her fingernails. Not weird, right? Kids, high school kids do all sorts of stupid stuff. Right, names. I used to have the girl's name I liked on my shoes, right? It's not weird. Her 3 other girls that had the same boy's name on their fingernails. And he marked them as his. They were branded his. Didn't cut them, didn't tattoo them, didn't put hot metal to skin, but they were his. These girls weren't being noticed because they looked halfway decent, even if they didn't have a place to stay. Because in the short term, he was taking care of them. They weren't on drugs. He was just bringing them from poverty up a level, and they were just so grateful not to be in poverty and to have a little bit of acceptance. Have a place to stay, because they could sleep in the crack house if they needed to. Some of them had families to go to, but some didn't. This is the reality for these kids. So let me give you kind of 2 parting shots as practicality. Number 1, if you don't have this number in your cell phone, you should. I've called it dozens of times and I've been right once. But I'm all right with that. Like, that's actually not bad odds, right? That I was right once ever is awesome. I also had a 15-year-old girl in a group that I ran for kids that were on probation and had to come talk to me. By the way, that is a wonderful group of young people who are court-ordered to come and talk to a social worker. They love you, except that they don't, and they don't want to be there at all. But she recognized victimization, and her friend made the phone call. 4 girls taken out of a guy's house who was 40 years old. They were 16, and they all called him daddy. This number makes a big difference. I want you to consider as you're going forward. I gave you a couple of different things to do. I want to acknowledge that probably a lot of this conference is about sex trafficking. Right? Leslie spoke. Dr. Williamson spoke. I'm speaking about sex trafficking. It is the smaller of the 2 forms of human trafficking. Sex trafficking is about 1/3 of the amount of money and people that are injured. If you want to change the world, it cannot just be interpersonally and relationally and changing the way you view sexuality. You have to change the way you view consumption in general. That includes sexuality. But where does human trafficking happen in Michigan? At Meijer, at Walmart, at Target, at all of these places. And if we don't open our eyes up to the fact that we need to change consumption as we engage relational issues with those who are most vulnerable, this problem doesn't go away. I'm going to be around for the next few minutes. I hope that you had at least some insight into what drives a child to become homeless, what situation they're in, how they are emotionally and developmentally, how this relates to human trafficking, and how you actually engage the issue. I'm not going to give you one way to engage it because justice looks different for everybody. But you'll know that you're doing it when your life becomes no longer easily manageable. Because injustice is incredibly practical. You have to do absolutely nothing for injustice to continue. But justice is incredibly impractical because you have to change something. So as your life becomes more impractical, you're on the right path. Make sense?